Hello, welcome back to the InsTech podcast. Zoya here, and this week I'm joined by one of our favourite returning guests, serial, accidental, and possibly addicted entrepreneur Bob Frady. You may remember Bob from our 2021 episode when he was running HazardHub, a company that went on to become one of the great success stories out of the Lloyd's lab. It was snapped up, and in true entrepreneurial fashion, Bob is back with his next venture, PropertyLens. Now, I'll be honest, this is a rather long episode, reaching up to 50 minutes, and we hesitated splitting it up into two parts, but I decided it was just too good to be released into two separate episodes, so we decided to put it out all in one bulk. But the episode is split into two parts, with the first being Bob outlining the background to the US property market and why PropertyLens needs to exist. The second part, Bob and Matthew delve into the insights into the true lessons behind founding and scaling businesses. If you want to learn anything about this, Bob is the man to ask, from co-founder dynamics to managing your equity like it's your teeth. Some little sneak peeks into what the episode with Bob will cover include what went right and wrong with the original thesis behind HazardHub. Why don't insurance agents talk to their customers about risk? Is the US real estate process really buyers beware? And what's the worst possible time to hire a salesperson? This episode had me laughing out loud multiple times throughout editing, so I hope whatever you're doing on this beautiful Sunday, whether you're on a run, on a walk, or simply making your morning cup of coffee, I hope you enjoy. Now let's dive into the conversation.
Brilliant to have you back. You are what I call a serial entrepreneur, maybe even an accidental entrepreneur, maybe even an addicted entrepreneur, because you're now on your third business. So I'm looking forward to talking about two things. So first of all, what you're doing in your new business with gathering property data, and also some top tips for those people that are building companies and growing companies, what they can learn. So PropertyLens is your new business. We'll come back to that in a minute. We originally met when you were running HazardHub, and we did a podcast back in April 21, and you've had 1,200 people listen to that. So that's your record. I guess John, was your partner, was on that with you, so I'm not quite sure whether you split that between the two of you, but that's the goal for today.
I give John all the credit. I'm just the pretty face. He's the brains behind the organization.
Well, either way, I think that's the target to beat. And then I noticed, I'm not quite sure whether we take credit for this, but then in August 2021, you sold to HazardHub. I know the numbers weren't officially disclosed, but I think it was enough that you probably could have stopped work at that point and retired, but yet you're still going. So it'd be good to talk about that. Yeah,
I'll give you full credit, well, non-paid credit for that. The London market was incredibly important to HazardHub. We had a number of customers over there who were doing really great things with data that US companies just weren't really ready to do. So it was and remains an important market for us. Plus, it's always fun to go to London. So, drinking beer at 2:00 in the afternoon after Lloyd's closes down, not a bad way to spend the day.
Well, I just give Lloyd's its due before anybody gets sued. I don't think it quite closes down at 2 p.m. But no, you can't even go for a drink if you work in Lloyd's. Not Lloyd's a corporation. You can if you're a company, so they don't even allow people to go to drink. So just to clarify that, just in case anybody's listening that's concerned about that.
Do we need to start over?
Definitely not. No, definitely not. Bring it on. That's how we find out. But that's how we work out who's listening to us. We just say things that people might not like, and then they tell us. Sorry, no, we're gonna lock that in.
Speaking of Lloyd's, to give Lloyd's some credit, Lloyd's Lab was incredibly beneficial to HazardHub. We got more out of that accelerator than any other accelerator that we have been part of, and we recommend all of our InsurTech friends, if you really want to be in the London market, then Lloyd's Lab opens the door for that market, and you should be there first over any of the other accelerators in the US, because they come with data, they come with a bias towards action, which is always refreshing for a startup. So big props to Lloyd's Lab. It's the one I recommend to almost all property-based startups in the US. Like, you gotta go. You gotta go.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And 2 weeks ago, we had two people from the current cohort on stage talking about what they're doing with actually interesting property information and flood data. And it's still going really well. Not just going well when you were part of it, but still going well today. And I know how you haven't disclosed the amount you were sold for, but I suspect you're up there on the top 2 or 3 success stories from Lloyd's for companies that have had funding or exited since then. So, yeah, good to know that.
There's two parts to an exit. There's how much you sell for and how much you get. And as soon as you get investors, you get less. So an investor had asked me, he's like, would you rather own 100% of a $10 million business or 10% of a $100 million business? And I was like, I want 100%. And so when we sold HazardHub, there were only 10 people on the cap table. So we got to keep almost everything, which was awesome. That's a big thing for a lot of startups. You rush to raise money and then you get diluted. So, the size exit that we had at HazardHub, if we had had a strategic investor, then we would have gotten 20 to 30% less in our own pockets. So that's always something that you want to consider when you see the size of the exit is, well, you may have a $100 million exit, but if there's 50 people on the cap table, how much are you going to keep? And that's the big consideration. Listen, it was enough to not have to work. It was enough. It changed my life permanently in a very positive way. So I'm forever thankful for it. But it was a lot of just being smart about not giving away your equity.
No, I think that's kind of jumping ahead to the last part of this, but it's a good thing to keep talking about. Maybe when you are back in London, because we quite like this idea of almost something like a debate, because there are obviously arguments both sides, because many people need the funding and need the help from investors, but it's as you say, it's understanding, particularly very early on. If you take investors in very early and start getting diluted from day one, then it's always going to go downhill from there. Whereas what we've seen in London is companies that tend to have done sort of angel investment, which gives them a little bit of money to sort of keep going, but doesn't dilute them too much. And then when they start to actually get some decent revenue, they bring in investors, but you're in a much stronger position then. So I think we can lot more in there to discuss. But no, I'm glad you managed to effectively bootstrap it as you did. And glad we're able to help. Glad you're able to help in our own way. Good. So just tell me, so PropertyLens, you started a new business, you've actually opened up into a broader market, but what problem are you solving for the world with PropertyLens?
So one of the theses that we had, which is a word I picked up from the capital world, they love to talk about their theses or their thesis. And so the thesis that we had with HazardHub is that if we made the data good enough and inexpensive enough, then insurers would share it with their insureds. And we were wrong. I mean, we still built a successful business, but that thesis was just wrong. And, and I live in a state in Minnesota here and in California where there are really big risks. For Minnesota, it's hail. For Southern California, it's wildfire. No one talks about them. The next time my insurance agent talks to me about risk will be the first time my insurance agent talks to me about risk. I'm not a young guy, so it was a bad thesis. Still built a good business, just a bad thesis. So this time, when we sold the business, they say don't do anything rash. And of course, John and I both bought houses. And we knew a lot about the houses because we had the HazardHub data. We had aerial imagery data from some of our friends. We had a lot of data from a lot of our friends, and we used that data to buy the house, to see what's not exposed, that what people not talking about that we can talk about. And we fancy it as sort of a Carfax for houses, which British people don't understand because I don't think they have Carfax over there. But it's a history report on the house before you walk in the door, before you make the offer. And we thought, well, don't other people have this problem? And it turns out that they do. According to the National Association of Realtors in the US, 42% of people wish they had done more homework on their property. And that's where we come in. We are a home history report for every residential address in the US outside of Alaska. That's what we're trying to solve for, is that, buying a house is very, very stressful. We want to make it slightly less stressful by giving you the information to say, let's talk about these issues. We're not trying to red flag a house. What we're trying to say is, here's the issues you should discuss with the realtor before you choose to make the biggest investment decision of your life. And that's where we live.
It's really interesting that point you made about the insurer, or I guess the broker, probably a lot of the time not asking those, telling you about the risk on your house. I mean, I can sort of understand why that is sometimes, because it means you don't buy the insurance. But I hadn't realised that was so prevalent. But in the UK, when we buy a property here, our lawyer has to do some due diligence on the property. So usually the biggest risk in the UK is floods. Does that not happen in the US? Do you not get advice from your buyer or solicitor or attorney?
So the way the process works in the US is you go and you look at a house, and then at some point you make an offer on the house, and it becomes a binding contract at that point. And then you get a home inspection. Now, sometimes there's what's called an inspection contingency, where you get an inspection, and if things are identified, then you can negotiate those findings from the inspection. If the market is very hot or competitive, then a lot of times you have to waive the inspection contingency. Still get the inspection, but if the boiler turns up bad, then too bad. You bought it as is. So you don't, and then not everything has to be disclosed. Like flood risk doesn't have to be disclosed in most states. Florida just started doing it because of all the flooding issues that they had. Most states don't require it. So it's not the same as in the UK. It's a little bit of buyer beware in the US more than it is in the UK.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I suppose also, this would apply to the UK as well. But you kind of want to filter out the properties that are going to have something seriously wrong with them before you start going down that whole process of commissioning reports and putting in offers anyway. So I can see there's a sort of first level of just like weeding out the ones you don't want. But Bob, just it's a little bit back to where we started. But why do you bother? You made enough money. You could probably buy lots more houses. Why to go through all the stress of building up a business?
I ask myself that question a lot, usually every couple of days. I'm like, what are you doing? But the answer, there's two answers. The first is that I don't like to see people get screwed. I'm a big believer in fairness, and the way the real estate industry works is really unfair towards the buyer. There's a wrong that we can right. So that's always how I like to operate. It's like, there's something here that needs solving. Who else is going to do it? So, my wife would say I have a hero complex, but that's a whole nother issue. But there's a problem to be solved. It's like, if nobody else is doing it, well, why not? Why not? And so that's reason number one. Reason number two is because when you spend your whole life achieving things, you can't just turn it off. As my old co-founder, the late great Brady Faust, used to say, there's no off switch on the Brady machine. And so I've co-opted that. There's no off switch on the Frady machine. I was like, what else am I going to do? I'm a terrible golfer. I don't have a lot of hobbies outside of business. My wife, every once in a while, she's like, you need to go to a conference and just leave me alone for a few days. And I enjoy helping people. So you put those together, and why not do it? The thing about entrepreneurship that really threw me is I never really thought that I was the guy to be running a business. And I was kind of forced into it with HazardHub. HazardHub was a side project. And then I got fired from my real project. So HazardHub had to become our business. And then after doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, where have you been all my life? And being an entrepreneur is a blast for me. It really fits my skill set very well. Together with John, we're a partnership for sure. We complement each other very well. And I like it. It's fun. Why not do it? And so when I see a problem, I look at it like, well, how do you solve this problem? And then is there a business in here? And go start it. Enough of people telling you what you shouldn't do. Screw them and start my own business. Bet on yourself. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. So you really are making the world a better place, which lots of people claim. So PropertyLens, back to PropertyLens. So you've identified a new segment to look after. You kind of sort of know, well, you don't, obviously, as a consumer of a house. But I think it's fair to say your world has been in the insurance world or selling into insurance. So it seems to me you were starting off almost from scratch to sell this business. So how do you first of all understand what the market is? And then how do people find out about PropertyLens and pay you money?
We do start from scratch to an extent. Now, we also have a B2B business. So in the process of building, because the first thing you have to do is build the underlying data structure. Because if you don't have data in your reports, then your reports don't mean anything. So we had to rebuild our entire data architecture. We rebuilt all of our hazard data architecture. This is now the fourth time we've actually built geospatial risk data sets. So each time you get a little bit smarter, you hope. And so we do allow people to API into the underlying data for risk assessment, for underwriting, for actuarial, for inspections, for whatever they need to. So we do have that piece of the business. And because we had a good reputation in the marketplace and people like dealing with us, then they came to us and said, hey, you got some data? I want to plug in. And we're in the process of, helping those people out. One of the things that was the most surprising thing was people really liked our business model, where, as John and I used to say, it's like two dudes on the beach talking about data. It's like, yeah, dude, this is good data. You should try it, man. And, because we're California people, that's how we talk out there. And they say, you like it? Cool, use it, man. We'll charge you for what you use. And people like that business model. So we've continued that business model while we also go directly to the consumer for the reports. Now, getting the ear of the consumer is a constant work in progress. We use the socials, we use the Reddits, we use all the things where people are talking. My dad used to say, if you want to be a good fisherman, go where the fish are. And so you got to find out where the fish are and then talk amongst the people. So it's primarily social media, search, direct to consumer. It's really direct response using those channels. And that's how we do it on the consumer side.
Very interesting parallels between the way the insurance to consumer, a lot of those early insurtechs were trying to disrupt the sort of more traditional market, and really struggled because I suspect you've got to invest quite heavily to get the scale of that, because you need the scale to sell a business. You need to presumably need to get a certain momentum going for people to give you credibility. You need to find the early adopters in there. It's really interesting, and I'm sure you will push through that. But I think that's where a lot of companies really struggle, because you've got to get to that scale to make a business successful when you're selling to consumers and retail, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Business to business is very different than direct to consumer, because there's only a finite number of businesses who can use your product. And even if it's something like Slack, there's a lot of businesses that can use Slack. There's still a finite number, way less than the number of people in the US or in the world. So your marketing tactics always have to evolve. And if you don't get that critical mass, then you have some real issues. It's one of the reasons why we have a B2B practice, is because that helps, smooth things out while you're finding the growth pattern. And so it's a very tricky task to pull it off. And we're working hard to work our way through it. I don't think that we are completely there yet, but we're on our way to get there.
And just reminded me of one other influencer. What about mortgage lenders? Do they not require the buyer of a property to have some kind of, you mentioned flood is not required by the state, but does the mortgage lender not override that?
The mortgage lender does require a flood insurance certificate. So, and we can provide that. It's not core to our business, but yeah, are you in a FEMA 100-year flood zone? And if you are, then you have to have flood insurance if you're getting a mortgage on a property in the US. Otherwise, you don't have to have it. Even if you're flood prone, we could score an area as a flood risk that's not in the FEMA flood zone, and the lender's like, I don't care, that's not my problem. And the other problem is that people will buy flood insurance and then lapse it after the first year because it can be expensive. And to compound the problem, we were talking with a consumer who bought a house in Florida, and it had flooded, and she knew it had flooded. But the previous owner filed a claim with FEMA, but never did the work. They just let it dry out. So then it flooded again, and FEMA denied the claim because it had previously flooded and the work was never done. So this poor person is left with a $50,000 repair bill that she can't afford because the prior owner, FEMA didn't require a certificate of completion. Now, I don't know enough about how FEMA does things to know whether that's just a one-off or whether that's endemic to their model. But it's buyer beware for the most part in the U.S.
Wow. Yeah. And then on this theme of data, I remember the first time we spoke, and every time I see a fire hydrant in the US, I think of you, Bob. I sort of had the impression that you were creating this unique database of fire hydrants because the sort of proximity from a fire hydrant to a property was an indication of the fire risk. And I know you literally didn't go and like walk around and get them all. And I do also remember you telling me that in some states, I think that's considered as secret information, or I can't remember what the right word is, so you couldn't even get it. But I'm guessing you're not doing the equivalent of that of going out and sourcing all the data yourself personally, but I think you are doing a balance of third-party data you're buying in, which you sort of alluded to a little bit, plus you're still doing some of that acquiring data yourself.
Yep. Listen, we're data jockeys at the end of the day. It's in our blood. Whether that's good or not is another question. Like when I see, like we have a database of mobile home parks, but not the boundaries of the mobile home park. It's like we have the addresses, which is great. That's a good indicator, but not the boundaries. And I want the boundaries. So what do? We got to build it. And because a lot of insurers won't insure a mobile home or a manufactured home or a home that's in a park. And the first question they ask is mobile or manufactured, yes or no, when you shouldn't have to ask that question. That's a question that data should answer. So if there is a question that data should answer that we can build, because most people either don't have the will or the skill to build it, we'll build it ourselves.
What's the new equivalent to the fire hydrant? The sort of unique, that's the data that you mentioned the boundaries of mobile home parks, but anything else you sort of identified that's missing that you're now starting to acquire?
I think that there are a number of data elements that could be better digitized that are not. Hydrants and we're still doing hydrants. It's still a sickness. I have 15 pictures of fire hydrants on my phone. People are like, what's wrong with you? And walking around London was very confusing. I was like, where's all the fire hydrants? I was like, well, they're underground, which is really a slow method of extraction for a fire hydrant. And so it's a laborious process in London to get to a fire hydrant. Anyway, I think that there are always data elements that you can dig through. I think the next great one will be local building inspections. We're not on the process of building that yet. We're planning for it. But local building inspections, really harnessing and combining all of this government data is one of the things that we do very well, but one of the things that's extremely hard to do. Because you think about it in terms of federal government, and then there's state government, and then there's local municipalities. There's 8,000 of those. So you're going to have several hundred different variations of the same data, and you got to put them all together. It's part of one of the things we do in looking at building permits is the first thing we do is run it through a routine to clean it, because it just, everything's so different. So to clean it, combine it, and then extract knowledge from it is part of the process that we do on the PropertyLens side.
So, Bob, you've got a home in Southern California. We were all aware of the terrible fires in the Palisades earlier this year. It must be very close to you in lots of ways. First of all, you weren't affected directly by that, were you? You still got a house in Southern California. Yeah,
we were about 50 miles south of there, about 70 kilometers, I guess, is south of Palisades.
And then what's happening in what are you seeing? And I mean, I guess there's an opportunity for you as well, because my interpretation is the combination of state regulation around use of models, which is changing, but limitations on how admitted insurers can price, and therefore admitted insurers are in some cases withdrawing from California, which presumably means you've either got much more expensive fire risk, because they don't distinguish wildfire from fire, do they? It's just like fire. Or you don't have any fire. What's happening from your perspective, both with the kind of PropertyLens and Bob the Frady homeowner viewpoint?
So I never call my insurance company. I don't want any contact with them. I don't want to give them any reason to dump us after 20 years of being their customer. So learning how to be silent with my insurance company, which is kind of sad. It is what it is. In terms of California, it is, most of California, there's two ways to look at it. You look at it from a geographic standpoint, and you look at it from a population standpoint. California is a big state. It's a very big state. And most of that state is relatively empty. There's a lot of farmland, there's a lot of forest land. And so if you looked at the percent of the state that was subjected to wildfires, it's big. It's probably about a third of the state. But most of that area is empty. So you can have gigantic wildfires that don't threaten populations. There's two problems. Number one is people are moving into these areas. So whereas before it was no big deal, you burn a cabin down, you just rebuild it. But now people are moving permanent homes into there, like in Paradise and places like that, and surrounded by wildfire risk. And the municipalities kind of throw their hands up and go, whatever. The insurance companies will take care of it. And that's problematic. The second part is that wildfire models don't consider 100-mile-an-hour winds. Like there was a fire not far from our house a couple of months ago, right after July 4th. Some kid lit off some fireworks and lit the whole hillside on fire. And luckily the winds weren't blowing that day. And if they had been blowing at, 40 knots, great. The fire department's pretty good at putting that stuff out. If they had been blowing at 80 or 100, then the best suppression systems in the world aren't going to help you. And that's what happened in Palisades and over in Los Angeles. Is the wind was just so intense that even the best wildfire models got half of it wrong. I looked at ours, I looked at a couple of other folks, and it's like half of them were Fs and half of them were As. And because no one accounts for such strong wind. And if you did that, you would paint a lot of the population unfairly red. So it's really a balancing act. Insurers can't get the rate, or if they get the rate, they tax everybody instead of taxing the people who live in the most dangerous areas. And that's problematic from a state standpoint because you have an elected insurance commissioner who wants to be popular. And how do you become popular as an insurance commissioner? You blame the insurance companies for everything and you don't let them get rate. It's like, I think the best thing that would happen to California is just to completely deregulate the market. And listen, I'm not a conservative person. I'm fairly liberal, but I think in this case, deregulate the market and let the market decide the price, I think is the best way to go. Now, on the back of that, you have carriers, smart carriers, who are coming into the market as non-admitted carriers and cherry picking all of the places that the admitted carriers dump. Because an admitted carrier will say, I'm going to shut off this zip code, which is the stupidest thing that you can do. But it's easy. And so then the non-admitted carriers are like, these houses down here are great. These over here aren't so hot, but these are great. So I'm going to make rate. I'm going to make non-admitted market rate on houses that should be in the admitted market and do very well for themselves. So it's interesting. I don't think that California will solve this problem anytime soon because solve is painful, which is make people in the wildfire prone areas pay the rate. I'm sorry to not be, I don't think that fair insurance and cheap insurance are the same thing. Fair insurance is you pay reflective of risk. And because the premium on my house is 1/100th of what my house is actually cost to replace. So why not give the insurer the ability to make the rate that they need to? They're not being, you could statutorily limit profits if you want to, but let the market decide. Oh my gosh, that was quite the diatribe there. I better get off of my soapbox now.
It's really important, I think, ultimately. But we're into a whole different area. But so the non-admitted market is mostly, and actually I don't really want to get down a sideline of non-admitted versus admitted, but the non-admitted market is basically that most of the excess and surplus market, which is written predominantly outside of the US. And actually a lot of that is written in London, isn't it? Which is then why your clients, or you've studied being successful in London, because they're taking on the risks that the insurers in the US wouldn't take, because that is sort of shortcutting the where that takes you. And so how are you getting on? So you've had PropertyLens going now for a couple of years. How are you getting on with the London market in terms of selling into insurers?
We have our first customer in the London market, and it's been interesting where we haven't really focused on the B2B market. It's something that we just launched in April, and because in response to customers coming to us saying, hey, we know you're messing around with data. What do you got? Let me test it out. And so now we're in the process of running through a bunch of those tests. We've signed up 11 customers so far, one in the London market. But part of that is just going to London and creating the market. So we'll be back probably in the fall. I don't think that we built this to become HazardHub 2.0. We do have some similarities to our prior businesses, but that's not our goal. But if somebody wants to give us money for things that we do naturally every day, okay, well, we'll take it. Not shy.
Well, and that's good. I don't think you're naming that company yet, so we won't put you on the spot and ask you who it is. But I think I do know who it is, and I respect them very highly, and I know they don't make those choices lightly. So congratulations with that one. So, Bob, I just want to come back to a bit more on building businesses now. So this is like sort of part 2 of the discussion. So anybody listening who wants to catch their breath, pause, come back, get part 2. You very kindly agreed to sort of give some top tips for building businesses. So you're on your 3rd gig now, and you also have been successful. I'm guessing when people meet you now, there's a very different way they sort of look at you if they know you've already had 1 or 2 successful exits. So first of all, what can you talk about that you would be a sort of tip to give somebody that you've learned that has made you really helpful and successful in building a business?
I think that you have to do a couple of things. First of all, understand that this is a gamble. It's like you're going to Vegas. A lot of people don't succeed in Vegas, and you might not succeed, and you have to accept that. You try to hedge the bet as much as you can, but you're still making a bet. And some people aren't comfortable with that. So you have to decide, are you comfortable with that? The first thing I would do if I were thinking about starting a business is I would pay a designer, and I did this a couple of times, to sketch out what it was that we were trying to develop. So I would make these chicken scratch drawings, give it to the designer. She'd make it look really great. And then you take that design and you show it to potential customers. So, hey, this is what we're thinking about building. Is this something of value? Regardless of whether or not, you don't even ask them to buy it. You just show it to them to get their feedback. People will always give you feedback. They won't necessarily give you money, but they will give you feedback. Now, if you build something that's interesting to them, then you ask them for, a down payment. If you're building something and you show it to someone and they go, well, I'd buy that if we had it. And then you say, well, how about a down payment? And some people will say yes. And that's how we got our first customer at HazardHub. That's exactly what we did. And that's what we did with PropertyLens. Is I spent a year with a mock-up just going around to people saying, what do you think about this? And they're like, this is incredible. I wish I had this when I bought my house. So now people might be nice to you because, they don't want to be rude to your face. But for the most part, that's why you talk to as many people as possible. So don't necessarily spend all your time building the product. Spend your time showing what the product will be, then bring that to people, and then build the product. Because they may have some very different ideas about what you're building. That'd be very positive for you. So that's number 1. Spend time in front of your potential customers before you spend a lot of time in building things.
Yeah, Bob, that makes complete sense. I think so. When in your example, that's basically building screenshots. Would it be of what the customer would see? And because that, to me, not everybody, but anybody who's not familiar with it and interested in building a business, I'd recommend very much reading The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. That's very much his mantra, isn't it? And he sort of failed. He failed the first time because he built it and they didn't come, and then he did exactly that. So yeah, first one, build a mock-up, show people, makes complete sense. What about number 2?
So number 2 is decide what you want your company to be. And it's the question we talked about earlier. Do you want to own 100% of the business, or do you want to own a fraction of the business? And if you want to own 100% of the business, or at least keep that 100% within the founder stage, then you got to bootstrap. You're not going to be raising money. And that dictates everything that you do during that first phase of your growth. Because as soon as you take on money, you dilute yourself. So can you do this while you're doing a full-time gig? Can you get other consulting work? that helps to feed you while you're building this business. Like, we took no money out of HazardHub for 2 years. So I was doing consulting, everybody else was doing other things. And at the same time, we were running the business. So it was a lot of hours, a lot of stress, but no money came out of that business for 2 years. And then finally, we got to the point where we were generating enough revenue where we could support the team. So that's a critical question in how you want to, because people get very ego driven. They're like, I raised $25 million. So yeah, big deal. What are you doing? Yeah, maybe in some companies that's necessary, and some it's not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of, it's implicit in what you say, but it's worth calling it out. It's start with the end in mind. I mean, and that's there is a discipline of people going to investors, because you need to do this. Like, what's your exit strategy? Are you building a business that you want to exit in 5 years, 10 years, lifestyle business? But that really focuses on. And then there was something else you mentioned around the challenge of raising too much money, which is there's too much, and therefore people spend it too quickly or spend it on the wrong things, don't they? If they've got those funds coming in too early.
Oh yeah. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And when you bootstrap, you have a little bit different approach. Like, for example, I love to talk to founders. I don't charge them. I just want to talk to people who, are going through the same thing, because I didn't have a lot of people I could talk to going through it. I figure, well, I might as well try to be a source for good, if you will. And I'm talking to this woman, and she's building a fantastic product, and she's looking to raise money, and people are willing to throw money at her. And I'm like, why do you want to do that? And she's like, well, I, want to start to pay people. And I'm like, well, you've got customers lined up. Just ask them. Just ask them for 25% of the first year's fee, and as a down payment or a get started, and use that money to fund your growth. And then save your need for capital for when you've got more revenue and you don't have to give up as much. And she took that advice and rejected the equity. And now they want to give it to her even more because she said no. But she's on a path. She's on a path to completely eclipse anything we've ever done at HazardHub. And I'm so stoked for her, because it's like, wait a second, everyone tells you what you should do. And what you should do is mind your capital, guard your equity like it's your teeth, and don't give it away. And now sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have a family to feed. Sometimes you have to scale quickly because of competition. Sometimes you just need people to help drive the bus. And sometimes it's a race, and then you want to raise capital.
Yeah, I mean, as a friend of mine used this phrase, which has stuck with me, which is like, equity is a very expensive form of debt. I mean, that's the other angle is if you can borrow or get grants or thing. I mean, then that's a much cheaper way of funding a business than, as you said, giving up equity. And then back to your point about, of course, the other thing is you said you don't have to spend it, but actually, or be careful how you spend it. But the trouble is, of course, if you've got an investor that's giving you money, they want you to spend it because they're giving you to spend it to grow the business. And so, to some extent, you are forced to spend it and forced to demonstrate you hired people and don't necessarily hire the best people. So, yeah, it does come with some traps involved. Okay, what next? Top tips.
So the third thing is to decide what you're good at. You have to make a table of 3 columns. First column is things I'm good at that I enjoy doing. The second is things I'm good at that I don't enjoy doing. And third is things I just don't enjoy doing and I'm not good at. And then decide which one of these is critical to the business. And if everything that you like to do and are good at is the critical part of the business, then you're fine. But if something is in these other categories, then you're going to find somebody who can do it for you, because it's really hard to do everything. And now some people can. I admire those people. I'm not one of them, and so get a co-founder is really the key, and it's not like 90-10, we're both co-founders. I'm like, that's not co-founders. There's nothing co about that. It's find someone who does the things that you don't like to do, but that are critical to the business. And like, I'm good at sales. I don't like it. I give it to John. John loves it. I don't like the negotiating. It's like, hey, here's the price, take it or leave it. And John's much better at actually negotiating. And so I like the vision, I like the product, I like the marketing, I like all that stuff. And he doesn't like it. So it works together. And there are a number of people I've said, you need a co-founder because this is too dependent on you right now. So that's the third thing. Decide whether you can do it yourself, but really get a co-founder.
And I completely agree on that point about founders. I mean, Y Combinator, which is one of the biggest, most successful accelerators out of California, certainly used to, may still insist on co-founders in there. I mean, I've got a co-founder in the business. You know, I would be hopeless if I tried to do business on my own. Or certainly would have been the first time round. Maybe second time round, you get more self-awareness. And then, well, Bob, if I can just squeeze one more out of you, the fourth top tip.
My fourth tip is your job is not to please everybody. Your job is to find people who agree with the way you want to do things. So we would, at HazardHub especially, we had this all the time where if you didn't fit what we wanted to do, we would just say, okay, this is not a good fit. And startups get so paranoid about saying no. It's like sometimes no is your best answer because you have to search through a lot of people and they're like, well, if it did this or it did this or it did this, then we might spend money. It's like, then you're just wasting your time. So find the people who agree with your approach and focus on them and say goodbye to the ones who don't. And don't say, hey, listen, this sounds like we're just not on the same page. We'll be here in a couple of years if things change. But for right now, I think this is probably not the best use of both of our times. And be willing to say no and most, like when people do POCs, like if there's not an execution plan into a rollout, then why are you doing a POC? I don't want to scratch somebody's itch. I don't want to just satisfy their curiosity. I want to satisfy their curiosity, but if it comes out good, I want to do business. And you make that clear from the very beginning that, hey, listen, what's the execution plan? What does a win look like? And what's the execution plan? So find people who want to do things your way and just move on from the rest.
Yeah, that POC or proof of concept is a real killer and just black hole to fall into if it's not properly managed. And then there's something you implied there, Bob, you might want to say a few more words on because we were talking about this previously around when's the right time to bring a sales resource into your business, and particularly if you're kind of in that early stage, no funds or low funds.
Do not bring a salesperson into your business until you know that you can feed that salesperson regularly by having a successful product. So until you have product market fit, do not hire a salesperson because the worst person in an organization is an unhappy salesperson because they will do one of two things. Number one, they will make stuff up to sell. Salespeople are meant to bring home, they're the hunters. So they'll hunt something that you might not want to cook. And so a lot of times it's because the salesperson doesn't have something that's saleable. And so it's a huge mistake to bring on a sales resource too soon. Until you have probably 5 or 6 customers, I would not bring on in a B2B environment. I would not bring on a salesperson. It's when you know what the model is and you can say, execute this model and keep them busy and keep them successful, that's when you bring on a salesperson. More salespeople do not result in more sales. More salespeople result in more headaches if you don't feed them properly. So they're like chimpanzees to a certain extent. They'll tear your face off if you're not careful.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm not quite sure the last comment, but the I know
I love salespeople. I was a salesperson.
Well, so is I, and I ran a sales team, and I completely agree with you. And when you say feed, that doesn't literally mean you can pay them. It means they need deals to go and close because they'll get frustrated. And you talk about hallucinations with ChatGPT. I was just thinking there about you get your salespeople hallucinating about things. Although the one caveat I would say, and I think this is an observation I've made for quite a lot of people when they're thinking about what is a characteristic of a salesperson, is often your best salespeople will want to be part of building the business and part of creating the new products. You just want them to do that in a controlled manner, not do it because they haven't got anything else to sell, so they're going to make something up. But I think the flip side to it is you get a good salesperson in. They're that old-fashioned sales quota-driven people. They really want to make the business successful and be a key part of your team.
So here's a fun story. HazardHub got started because of that very reason, where I was working for another data provider way back in the day. And I'm like, these products aren't saleable. And they're like, okay, smart guy, design something that's saleable. And so John and I came up with the idea of what eventually became HazardHub. And they're like, there's the door, see you later. And decided that our idea was stupid. And so we sat on the sideline for a couple of years. And about 5 years later, John and I were like, this is really still a good idea and nobody's pursuing it. So let's go do it. And that's how we started HazardHub, because we wanted to be part of the team that grew the business. But the executives don't see salespeople as smart enough to run the business, which is really, it's a big clash. Like I remember I was in a sales call one time, 25 people in the room, and I'm explaining the product, and someone asked me my opinion about what the execution strategy should be. And my client champion said, he's the sales guy. What are you asking him for? And I was like, oh, wow. So yeah, they do want to be part of the growth of the business, and you have to be prepared for that if you find a great one. So yeah.
I suspect, Bob, it was more than, oh, wow. I guess physical contact might even have been involved at that point. If someone said that to your face.
It stunned me. It actually stunned me into silence, which is really hard to do. I was like, oh, okay, that's how you see it. And then you adapt and you move on. But you got to have a thick skin in sales. You can't be too wigged out by that stuff. But it's like, yeah, people have views of salespeople that aren't necessarily very positive, and there's good reason for that. So you have to make sure that you have a path for success for these people, not just based upon if I had 12 salespeople and they all sell $1 million, I'll sell $12 million. It's like, no, that's not how it works. And so, yeah, it's in the startup phase. As the business matures, whole different story. But in the startup phase, you as the founder, you got to be the best salesperson, or your co-founder has to be the best salesperson. And founder-led sales are a real thing through the first 2 to 3 years of your business.
Well, Bob, we've covered a huge amount in there. It's been fascinating. Let's assume you've got your 1,200 people listening. So, anything you're looking for, any help you need, just final chance to sort of anyone. I mean, I guess you want some customers as well. So, anything you want, and what's the best way to get hold of you?
We say, if you love your data provider, then marry them. And if you don't, then come and talk to us. And so we're happy to help however we can. We're not into breaking up marriages or anything like that. But if you're not happy with them, you're not married to them, then, we're here. It's Bob at PropertyLens is the easiest way to reach me. You can also reach me on the LinkedIn. More than happy to connect with folks. I just love talking about this stuff. You talk about risk assessment and you talk about all this stuff to your family. They're like, oh, will you just stop? So to be able to talk to people who are actually interested in it is such a cool thing. And all API driven, super easy to connect, all that good stuff. Bob at PropertyLens is the way to reach me.
Brilliant. Well, Bob, I enjoyed that again, as always. And let's find an excuse to come out to London before the end of the year, because I don't think we're going to be in the US. But we've got a load of stuff on, and I could slip you onto stage somewhere, or you could get one up, and you could actually we could run an entire event for you. So depending how where you are in your marketing journey, but definitely love to get you back over here and get you face to face with a bigger audience again.
Let's hope that Crystal Palace is in the Europa League next year. Enough with this UEFA nonsense. They won the cup. Put them where they're supposed to be.
Great. Well, I'm sure you've just got some more supporters out there, or maybe not if they're not Crystal Palace supporters. And I guess for half the listeners who are based in the US,
come on, you Palace!
It's a football or soccer analogy. Bob, I'm going to let you go. It's Friday, and I'm sure you've got lots of things to do. Many thanks.
You've got the seaside right there. It's like, you need to go. Get out there and enjoy your life. Enough talking to me.
Well, if you've made it this far, then I'm pretty sure you found that as interesting as I did. The InsTech podcast comes out every Sunday morning, where we spotlight the latest news, leading voices, and freshest updates across insurance that you need to know about. If you would like to take part in these conversations, head to www.instech.co to find out how you can join our network and be a part of the insurance intelligence for the curious.